my name is Steyn. Welcome to you all. We're very excited to have you all here today. I was just saying, despite the initial hiccups, we're quite keen to try and run a successful hybrid meeting. So to make sure that the online participants are as included in the conversation as those that are present here in person. So please, as we go along, online colleagues use the question function. That we have people keeping an eye on the questions. Please put up your hand if you need to talk, etc. So we were quite keen to make sure that you're well integrated into the process. I'm just going to, we are not here today to hear me speak, so I'm just going to say a few things about Meridian and a little bit about what we've been doing thus far. And then we will get into the real meat of the meeting. So I presume you can still see my shared screen. And I'm going to try and how do I move the slides? Okay. Try that now. Okay. So just briefly, a quick point about Meridian. For those that don't know us, we're a kind of a specialized energy and climate economics consultancy and think tank based in Cape Town and Gauteng, South Africa. We now have two kind of areas of presence, and we provide a range of services, both as a kind of public interest role, think tank role player. We also advise government, we advise private sector clients, etc. We kind of operate in the intersection of economics, energy regulation, energy investment, finance, and climate issues. We are quite well networked in this space in South Africa and also internationally, particularly in the kind of in the climate finance and particularly around issues to do with coal retirement. And I guess one of our strengths is that we bring quite quantitative capabilities. We have significant energy modeling and financial modeling capabilities, which we rely on a lot for the different kinds of strategy or policy questions that we address. Okay, let's try and move to the next slide. This is just a little visual that Peter put together to show who we have represented here today. We'll do a quick round of introductions just now, but we're very excited to have quite a wide range of public sector and private sector and universities being represented in this initial conversation today. So we think it's really valuable. So to get it now a bit closer to the modeling questions, and the purpose for today, I guess, is just to talk a little bit about how we have used energy system modeling in recent times, and also a bit of a framework about how we've thought about it, how we've understood the different types of modeling. So, of course, we all know there are a range of different types of energy system modeling. We have primarily focused on two areas, which is really looking at over longer time frames. The one is the traditional type of capacity expansion planning modeling that we're very familiar with in South Africa. In South Africa, we're well aware of the integrated resource plan and the type of modeling used that underpins that work. So we've, along with many of you here, run those kind of models. And use that to address important policy and strategy questions. Then what we also do, and what others also do, is on a slightly shorter time frame, use power system modeling or energy system modeling to understand how the system will be operated, and also what its costs would be on a more shorter term basis. Of course, that also addresses the question of whether you've got adequate resources in the system. And in our particular context in South Africa, this is the kind of modeling sometimes referred to as power system dispatch modeling, which you would also use to figure out how much load shedding you might be having in the foreseeable future over the next few years. So this is not so much about how do you build a power system going into the future, but given a particular expectation around the resources you will have on a power system, how will it perform, how will it be operated? And of course, then the other, what we in South Africa haven't spoken all that much about until recently is the grid itself. So that's becoming a much more important area of investigation going forward now, as we all know. So of course, there are different types of system modeling that we require there, power flow modeling, transmission planning, and reliability. And then if you want to zoom in a much more shorter kind of time frames, then you've got the whole dynamic questions around transient stability modeling, reliability analysis, etc. And there would be more different or detailed versions of these different types of approaches. Maybe to get more to the reason why we have asked you to join us today is that we think it's, given our recent history in South Africa and given the rapid process of the energy transition unfolding and the very complex societal and economic issues that it brings up in all countries, including in our part of the world, we think essentially that it is really important to have a broad community involved and capable of doing this type of analysis. Traditionally in South Africa, we've relied on just a handful of players. Typically, ESCOM government itself doesn't actually really have much of this capacity. The CSIR has modeling capacity, and then there's some capability at UCT and also at Meridian. We think that the country needs, and I'm sure other countries as well, needs a much more vibrant, open, participative conversation around key questions in the energy transition. And one way to achieve that is to empower people with the ability to do proper technical analysis. Unfortunately, much of the software in this space is very expensive and not really accessible to students and academics and to small advisory groups and think tanks like ourselves. So we've been very excited to follow the development of open source options over the last few years, and have now which has now reached the point where one can actually use those tools. And that's exactly what we've now started doing. And we want to use today to launch and kind of encourage a broader community around these issues and building a community of practice around this in South Africa. And so we're also very pleased to have some of the key leaders in this space, Tom Brown, Max Parson, and others joining us today. We're very happy to have them here with us. Just to give some quick examples of the kind of work we've done in recent years, and many of you could probably put up similar types of examples, but just to demonstrate where we're coming from in our thinking and how we've traditionally or recently used this kind of modeling. I mean, you might be familiar with our Vital Ambitions study, which we published about 2 years ago or so, where we asked the question, well, actually, what would it cost if we were to decarbonize our power system faster? Because nobody really looked at that. And so we worked with the CSIR at that time. They were running their Plexos model of the power system, and we worked very closely with them. And at the time, Joanne was still part of the team there. And essentially, we could come up with this kind of results where we could see that actually, over a 23-year period, if you were to become much more ambitious about the total emissions from the power system, it wouldn't actually cost much more. And that's really, of course, the effect of the fact that in our country, particularly, renewable energy is so cheap that it really makes that possible. So those are the kinds of interesting and useful, and many more versions of that kind of study that one can do. Here's another example. The first one was a kind of a capacity expansion type investigation. This one was a study that the CSIR did, and I think Joanne was involved with this. Excellent study. It was published, was it about a year and a half ago, two years ago, Joanne? And where they looked at the outlook for load shedding. And 2 years ago. And as Peter has pointed out, the modeling has been really very impactful and accurate. So the level of load shedding we have already had this year is pretty much in line with what their modeling showed was to be expected if we did not intervene fast enough at the time. And unfortunately, we didn't. And this is why we are here today. And their modeling showed pretty much that we're in the same ballpark now empirically as they forecast. So that's just another demonstration of the type of work one can do with this. We recently we're getting a bit closer now to the PyPSA tool, open source tool. This was just the reason we're showing this here is just to demonstrate that even with a relatively simple application of a PyPSA model, you can do quite powerful work. So we did these two studies earlier this year. The one was around retrospective look at what would have happened last year if we had more renewables on the system. And the second study was, we said, okay, well, what would it look like if we were to put together a game plan to end load shedding in South Africa? And in both cases, we essentially used a what we call as a dispatch model. So it's a single node model. Peter can explain this in more detail if necessary. So it's a relatively simple model, but you can use it to ask some really interesting questions. So using last year's data, we actually ran two different models independently. We ran this in a spreadsheet, which Adam built, and Peter then also used PyPSA to do the same modeling. And essentially, we could see that based on last year's empirical data for the power system, if we had only 5 gigawatts of additional renewables on the system and nothing else changed, we would have eliminated 96.5% of all the load shedding we had last year. That was a very counterintuitive and very powerful finding. We've got, of course, lots of detailed information to explain why that was the case. It has a lot to do with the fact that our peakers run out of fuel and our pump storage assets are essentially sterilized because we can't use the energy in them, because we can't refill it. So we have to be using them as fast response backup for the coal plants. So actually, this just demonstrates the impact in the power system when you're severely energy short. And adding energy right now converts into capacity, basically. That's the kind of stuff you can do with the PyPSA. We then also used, on the very short term, we looked at the existing initiatives in place to expand capacity on the system, the renewable energy procurement programs that's been run by the IDP office. So the different rounds, and we sort of asked the question of, well, how much of that will realize round 5, round 6, the emergency RMI-P round. We put that into the model in terms of what the capacity we expect to be available, and we figured out what else we need to add to get to an adequate power system in a reasonable period of time. And that's what's modeled on the right. And so that's what the left-hand side is what we thought was the base case, the business as usual case. In June this year is what we could see is in place and can be expected to come online. And on the right-hand side is what a risk-adjusted plan would have to look like if you actually take into account some possible delays around some of the coal units and nuclear plant, etc. And so that shows you what, at that time, we could, with simple modeling in PyPSA, I could figure out what was necessary. And then this just shows what a typical dispatch profile would look like for a day in October 2025, if you were either on the business as usual case, the base case, where you are severely short of energy and capacity, or if you, on the right-hand side, if you then put those resources in place, as we show you on this right-hand graph. And that's it. I think I'm going to stop there.